is no way we can have any kind of financial discussion unless we're talking about the almighty Fed, because the Fed is the one that controls things like the cost of money. And the cost of money directly is reflected in things like assets and the cost of goods and services, how much value a dollar has. One of the defining economic attributes between these two generations and really has led to a haves and have-nots in the United States. So first, let's look back prior to 1980 at interest rates. Well, we should note that interest rates have been above 6% all the way until really 2008. This factor defined the generation that we call baby boomers. They lived in an environment in which millennials have never seen. In fact, the highest interest rate that millennials have experienced in their adult lifetime is simply going to the lowest interest rate levels that baby boomers saw in theirs. Let's look at the last 30 years. Since 1995, we've gone from 9% interest rate to 2020 when we saw under 3%. In the last few years, that has shot up to 6 and 7%. That is a dramatic change in a very short period of time, which is dominating millennials' lives. But really, we have to compare the two. Take a look at how it looks for each generation at the age of 30 to really see what the effects are. Starting at the age of 30, millennials had never seen interest rates above 4.5 until 2022. Their adult life had been dominated by lower interest rates. Now, I am an older millennial, right? I'm like the first, 1984, and I was in the workforce right before 2008. A lot of millennials, though, were not. They did not even join the workforce until after 2008, experiencing extremely low interest rates. Now, look at baby boomers. At the age of 30, their interest rate started on average at 9%, a level that millennials have still never seen. In fact, the average baby boomer didn't see below 8% interest rate until they were 55. They were almost 60 years old until they saw an interest rate at the level that millennials have today. Now, why is this such an important factor? Well, it's important because the baby boomers' primary source of wealth came from owning a home. The second was through pensions and the stock market. Owning a home and home ownership is the largest wealth creation for the average American. But we also have to then understand what the opportunities were to each generation. This defines millennials. Millennials put off home ownership more than any other generation we had seen. After 2008, there was a surplus of housing inventory. We had the lowest prices that we had seen in generations. We had interest rates that weren't anywhere close to anything anyone had ever seen. But millennials were scarred. Millennials went through and saw all of their parents go bankrupt in the housing crisis. Millennials began to believe and think that owning a home was stupid, and they did not want to repeat their parents' mistakes. In fact, that culture didn't change for almost a decade. And by that time, home prices had risen dramatically due to low interest rates. But the homes of today, the homes that millennials are buying, are not the same homes that the baby boomers were buying. Let's compare at similar ages. So baby boomers at the age of 30 or 35, the average home size was 1,700 square feet, and the average number of people living in the home was 3+. That equals 567 square feet per person. Millennials, the average home size was 2,400 square feet, and the average household size was 2.5 people, or 960 square feet. That may not sound like a large amount but it's 69.3% more home than their predecessors. This also doesn't include the fact that home appliances that are standardized. Baby boomers, that was not nearly as mainstream. So now that we understand a little more layout of a comparison between the two generations, the number one driver of wealth, and the circumstances that they were living in, we have to understand this effect that low interest rates has on the economy as a whole. The devaluing of the dollar drives up asset prices. This asset price boom is what creates wealth. The baby boomers were on a ride of high interest rates to low interest rates, which drove the wealth from the stock market, from their home, from businesses, as money got cheaper and the dollar got devalued and asset prices went up. But it also created a huge divide, and that was the haves and have-nots. Put simply, if you owned assets, you were the haves, and if you didn't, you were the have-nots, because asset inflation, due to monetary manipulation, outpaced dramatically the average salary. With all of that appreciation, asset owners have more risk, especially when using debt like owning a home. And that's why baby boomers have rates of bankruptcy that millennials have not only never seen, in a lot of cases, the world hadn't seen. They went through a lot of hard economic times. And that was catapulted in 2008, where the number one person that got hurt was homeowners, which at that point, millennials were just coming of age. This decimated so many baby boomers and was a financial burden that millennials, we have not experienced. But we did experience it through the other generation. That is why millennials overall put off buying homes, even when incomes were relatively the same, and savings and home prices to income and interest rates were better than they had ever been and probably ever will be again.